Hello, everybody. Super excited to welcome you to our first podcast episode of A to Z of AI. Really thrilled to be doing this with you, Zac.
Hey, Anthony, it's awesome to be here. Super excited that we finally kicked this off.
I know. Hey, before we jump in, Zac, want to talk about what you've been hearing recently around AI.
Man, there's so much that we could talk about. I mean, obviously, we have uh, housekeeper robots coming this year or next year, which is already pretty amazing. I switched over from company work. I'm a law professor now, and several professors from across the country recently used a bunch of different foundation models to actually grade law school papers, which are no joke. And the models did incredibly well with thorough prompting. So, I mean, things like that get me really excited. But you name it, any category of work, AI is making inroads and not always having the obvious effect. Sometimes having really interesting, unexpected ones. It's a fun time.
Yeah. And these aren't just demos anymore, right? Like I still remember
No,
November 2022, ChatGPT. Fast forward to today and the crazy impact it has had, it is having, and it will have across everything that we're doing is just pretty profound. So really, really amazing to hear how professors are using it. And that's really what this entire podcast is about. We want to talk about how real people are using AI in real and practical ways to change the way we all do work. So before we jump in, Zac, I thought it'd be really helpful if we could just introduce ourselves. For those of you who don't know, I work currently at the Suite. We run a number of executive communities for C-suite executives who primarily work in the tech or tech-enabled space. That's actually how Zac and I originally got connected when Zac was in his seat as GC of Levels. I've been here for a little over 4 years. Prior to this, I spent over a decade primarily in legal academia, most recently at NYU Law. And what's really been interesting to me has been as AI has come to the forefront. It's been interesting to observe how we're all consuming and learning about AI, how we're all doing this together, and how I truly believe that this is a moment that is fundamentally changing the way we all live and work. I still remember about going from dial-up internet to faster speeds. Still remember getting my first iPhone, and this feels and is one of those transformational moments in tech. And yet I find that when I'm talking to people, there are folks who are still very early in their journey. There are folks who are experts, and then there are folks who are incredibly scared and have been wanting
yeah.
to just create a space where we should document this moment and this season live around what's working, what's not working, where can we all go together in this journey. So that's really what has interested me in all of this.
Yeah, Anthony, that's great. And I guess just to introduce myself, Zac Henderson, former general counsel in technology companies. It was such a pleasure to be a part of the suite for some time. I wish I still were. Transitioned into law teaching and research, principally because so much is really interesting right now in the context of AI and emerging technologies. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to get to just full time think about this stuff, think about it, talk about it, write about it. It's a really interesting space, and I share your perspective that this is a really interesting time. It's a bit of an inflection point, and because this is probably true of many technologies in the past, but this one in particular, it has the potential to change daily life so quickly in so many different areas. But it's also uh, a technology that carries a lot of fear with it. For some kinds of work, it's not very obvious how it either is or going to affect some people. I mean, this is a technology that certainly, at least for right now, feels like it affects knowledge workers quite a bit more than blue collar workers. That may well change in the next 5 or 10 years as more AI and robotics actually comes out. That's going to be a very interesting kind of step change in all this. But for now, what what knowledge workers know about these technologies versus what the rest of the country does. That delta is huge and it's growing, and with it, so does the fear. So it really is worth talking about this. This reminds me of something that's been going on for a while, and I'm sure you've seen, Anthony, and that's this kind of growing divide between uh, folks who are convinced that AI is the present and the future, and folks that are convinced that AI is just a bubble, right?
Yeah,
And that's it's really been interesting and a little bit disheartening to see just how committed those two sides are. And unfortunately, one of them is probably right. And if
yeah,
if we don't really bring everybody in, there's a chance that really well-meaning, thoughtful people could get left behind. So that's one of the things that I love about this podcast is, hold on, everyone. Here's how these tools not only can be, but are being used today from the mundane to the really complex, like everything.
yeah, yeah. And to your point, Zach, I think like we've moved right from being interesting, curiosity to it has become necessary.
Totally.
What happens if you are still sitting on the sidelines and or questioning if this is even real? And I also just want to acknowledge part of why we wanted to do this is that the learning curve can feel really intimidating.
Definitely.
And, in the worlds we live in, I think the learning curves, while intimidating, they're encouraged or
Mhm.
required. But there are so many worlds where that's not the reality. And
That's right.
so I'd hope that one of the things we can do is to create a level playing field. And even the name of this podcast, right, is to sort of not nod to that of like, hey, what does it look like to really provide a comprehensive look into AI, show practical ways. So I want to talk a little bit about like what this podcast is going to look like. But before I jump there, Zach, really quickly, like one of the things I also just want to highlight is when we first met, I still remember, I don't know if you remember this, but we were at a Suite Tech GC dinner in the Bay
Mhm.
Area, and we happened to sit right by each other and, met a lot of wonderful community members that evening, but I left that evening feeling really refreshed from the conversation that the two of us had. And the two
Yeah,
things that
likewise.
really thank you. The two things that really stuck out to me were that we brought in different perspectives to all of the different items we talked about that night, both
Yeah.
big and small, legal issues, where tech is headed, but I really loved this level of curiosity that you brought into the conversation
Yeah.
that when we would see each other at events following that particular event, we would continue to connect and reconnect around that. So I just want to say I'm super excited to be able to do this with you and to bring in your perspectives, to bring in my perspectives, to bring in other perspectives, but always center around curiosity and how we can learn from one another.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I think that's very much mutual. You can sort of tell the kinds of folks that are very curiosity driven. Obviously, you and I are those kinds of people. And it's a bit of a hack, right, in terms of meeting people in conversation. Because if you're curious, then you're curious about other people,
Yeah,
in addition to things and ideas and technologies. So it really makes for a very fulfilling life, and it's a great way to build relationships like this one. So
for sure.
mutual indeed.
Awesome. So Zach, what is A to Z of AI about, right? Like let's jump into that.
Yeah, great.
This is not an AI news podcast. There are
Mhm.
tons and tons of resources out there. And maybe we can share some of them as we go on from episode to episode. We're also not here to sort of hype up certain things or not. Um, so with that being said, what this is or isn't, Zach, like let's talk a little bit about how we envision future episodes looking like.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So the goal is bring in every single episode one person
Mhm.
and get very, very practical around how they're using AI. We're going to ask questions around what problems are they trying to solve? What problems have they solved? And maybe answer the big question in the room, like has the use of AI actually impacted and transformed their work? The goal here is to get folks from a variety of different industries, sectors, and
Mhm.
roles over time. So we really get a sense of how AI is being used across the spectrum. Anything
Yeah,
else that you want to
exactly.
add? There's that.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the core thing that excites me about this is, yes, AI is email drafting. Yes, AI is creating efficiencies here or there in these white collar spaces, but it has the potential to be so much more because this is such a general technology. Speaking of curiosity, creativity is really fundamental to how we'll see these tools get used. The way that people use these tools well is only bounded by human creativity and a desire to figure out, hey, how can I make this crazy powerful thing work for me in my work or my context or my household or whatever. So I think this is spot on. And like with so many things, that creative step is often the hard one. A handful of people out there are really creative and can come up with the great use case, the great new way to use tools. But for most of us, myself included, I'm really reliant on creative people to show me how they use tools in powerful, new ways. So hopefully, in talking to these brilliant people that are coming up in future episodes, we too will get to learn some great new ways to use these tools that we hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, I'm super excited. That is
Yeah.
going to be awesome. So Zach, let's actually just maybe start tonight by creating a base that we can all go forward with that hopefully will help listeners, folks who are watching, uh, get all around the same page. And I want to make this like very 101 for many folks. You already know this, but again, given our hope and our goal here, this is to ensure that everybody is coming from the same base of understanding. So what I'm going to do, Zach, is I'm going to throw some common terms we hear around this entire space. And it's sitting in that legal academia space. I'm going to ask you to wear that professor hat and help us understand some of these things a little bit better. So maybe we'll just start with the very, very basic thing of AI or artificial intelligence. What does it actually mean right now?
Yeah, cool. I mean, to begin with, defining AI, it's actually pretty difficult because it's something that's been around for a very long time. And of course, when we are talking about AI today, many people mean something like ChatGPT, right? Which showed up at the end of 2022. But in general, when we say AI, what we're really talking about is some kind of software or machine that is able to do things that we usually associate with humans and human thinking, right? Some kind of artificial system that can do human like stuff. It shouldn't be more complicated than that as a baseline definition.
Next thing I hear a lot about LLMs or large language models. How would you explain that?
Yeah. So large language models are in so many ways the big breakthrough into the modern public consciousness of artificial intelligence, right? Large language models are these basically math and software driven tools that have this remarkable ability to take in a piece of information and then through a process of basically computational statistics and prediction, um, give an output that is very responsive to whatever you told to it in the input, or what we're now often calling prompts. So it's the idea that it can actually respond in a human seeming way to text in particular in ways that are really remarkable and very different from how previous kinds of software that was more based on like if then statements. If the computer sees this word, then say that thing. It's not based on that kind of very deterministic technology. This is much more probabilistic. It's more statistical. It's more mathy. And that's what really enables it to be so powerful. But basics, large language models are the things like ChatGPT and others that take inputs and give us these remarkable outputs that basically predict the next word and then the next word and then the next word in highly convincing and often very useful ways.
You mentioned prompt, and we hear
Yeah.
a lot of times folks say, okay, you got to prompt GPT or other tools. I've even seen job roles for prompt engineers. So let's start with like, what do you mean when you say prompt?
Yeah, great. And I'll just give the caveat that remember, everyone. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm giving you my translation of this. I'm sure we'll have fantastic engineers on this show to correct my missteps and get this exactly right. But when we say prompt, what we're really talking about is the input. What is the thing that you are giving to the model, that you're communicating to it in the hopes that it responds to that prompt in a useful way, in the way that you want? It's the input to the large language models output, right? So a prompt could be as simple as I don't know, asking it to solve 2 plus 2 for you. It could be that simple. It could be as complex as asking it to help you design a new workout regimen or consider what kinds of foods you can or can't eat based on a given, allergy or profile or something like that. It is the thing, simple or complex, that we give to the large language model in hopes it gives us back what we want.
Let's talk a little bit about maybe a bit more of a technical term.
Mm.
This I've heard this term a lot. RAG. What does RAG mean?
Yeah, so this is where it will very much be helpful to get some of our computer science
Or yes.
friends on the podcast in the future. But RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and um, without getting too complicated, the major large language models, we sometimes call these foundation models. You might have heard the term frontier models for the really cutting edge versions of these. They get trained on a massive amount of data. So the state that they are in when you or I just use them is a state that has been trained on mountains of data, but they probably don't have my data, the specific stuff that I care about. So, for example, if I'm very interested in an AI tool helping to tell me whether an article that I wrote is well argued or not, well written or not, well structured or not, it doesn't have my article in its training data. Heck, it's something that I just wrote. So, this idea of RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, is foundationally the model's ability to take in new information and synthesize it along with its mass of training data to do particularized, useful to you things, as opposed to just relying on its sort of state as a trained model. This affects our ability to give it new stuff and say, hey, now what about this?
Zach, to your point on RAG, I just want to add the one thing that's quite challenging is when one is trying to build um, a process workflow, a custom GPT, for
Yes,
example. You need to provide it with a set of documents to then better drive the output you receive from it.
that's
And
right.
that process of providing and creating those documents can be quite cumbersome. And so
Yes.
the thing I've been thinking a lot about is, as we move forward, building the set of documentation to then create workflows that one needs gets really, really critical, and the impact that that can have. Anyway, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I think there's a lot to talk about around how RAG works and what that looks like. And again, we'll start to see this come into play when we are talking to individuals and hearing a lot more about how they're using AI and the impact that it's having. Um, any other terms, Zach, that you think we need to touch on before we move from here?
So I think there is probably one more term that we ought to talk about, at least briefly, Anthony, and that's the idea of a hallucination, right? This is something
On.
that ends up being, well, it's certainly very important in the context of um, the news around AI. I think it's one of the things that drives a lot of the worries and concerns and fears about AI as well. So, what is a hallucination in the context of artificial intelligence, or say a large language model? Well, remember how we talked earlier about how these tools are fundamentally probabilistic. This is math, right? And the tools are making an attempt, a very statistically accurate, in many cases, attempt to produce an output based upon the prompt, the input that you gave the LLM. But it's just probability, it's just statistics. And that means sometimes it provides an output that actually is not based in fact, but sounds an awful lot like it is. And again, if we think about these models as being designed to predict the right next word, then if there's something that your prompt is conveying you really want or are expecting or needing, then the algorithm and the large language model itself may unfortunately give you what you want when that isn't exactly what you need. You're expecting probably an accurate, vetted response that gives you the truth of what you're seeking. But these models, the concept of truth is not something that one can simply hard code into the algorithm. And this is going to be one of the interesting and very difficult challenges of getting LLMs just right and using artificial intelligence in increasingly more important and critical ways moving forward. How do we get all the advantages of these tools' creativity without suffering from the potential catastrophe of hallucinations at exactly the wrong time?
Yeah. Oh, so well said. I'm smiling because I think we can all relate to the moments
Oh,
we've already
yes.
seen AI hallucinate. And I think it goes back to also sometimes the impact prompting can have.
Yes.
And the more context you provide in your prompt, the more specific or directed your output is going to be. So, Zach, thank you for sharing all of that. I would love to maybe just quickly talk about some of the key players. We've talked about the terms, but maybe some of the key players that we hear often. And maybe we can start with some of what I consider, and feel free to jump in here as well, Zach, to add, right? What I consider to be sort of the key companies leading on this front. Certainly OpenAI with ChatGPT, Google with Gemini, Anthropic with Claude. I'd probably put those as the big three, so to speak, as it comes to generative AI tools that we can use for day-to-day usage. Anything else that you would add to that list?
I would say that that list is exactly right. I will add, though, that we ought to really be keeping our eye on the models coming out of China. Right now, they are a few steps behind, but they're catching up very quickly. So I suspect in the coming years and maybe even the coming quarters, we might hear more talk about models like Quen and others out of China that are actually not only very powerful, but quite a bit less expensive to run. And that's going to really drive a lot of their adoption as companies are really seeking the most uh, efficient models for whatever their particular use case is. As we might talk about later, it turns out actually running these tools can get expensive, both in terms of dollars and energy. So more efficient models that are able to do good work for cheaper are really going to be an important thing moving forward.
Yeah. I should also mention, love that you brought that up, Zach. I should also mention probably a fourth key player here, although their approach is a bit different, which is Perplexity. Love their tool. I was actually part of a fellowship program they ran earlier this year, and they already allow you to use another model from China that got into a lot of the news now, it feels like a year ago, DeepSeek. But on Perplexity, you can select what model you want to use and or they default to a certain model of their choosing, right? So a very, very different way of how to use AI for your day to day, and love, love, love what they've done. So maybe, Zach, we can talk a little bit about how we're using AI. I'm happy to kick things off, and maybe I'll just call out 4 to 5 tools I use every single day. So I'd start with both ChatGPT and Perplexity, and I'd say I've shifted what used to be my usage of Google to primarily using those 2 tools for any sort of day-to-day information and or other types of searches. Most recently, just earlier today, used Perplexity to help me think through an upcoming trip that I'm gonna be on, and perhaps some of the coffee shops and or restaurants I'd want to visit. That used to I used to do that via Google and spend maybe 15, 20 minutes trying to piece together a set of places I may wanna check out in a location. And now with the right prompt, I can do that in a matter of literally 1 to 3 minutes, which is incredible. On the note-taking side, I'm a huge fan of Granola. Absolutely love what they have built. And quick shout out and preview that we'll have somebody from Granola join us in the upcoming episodes. So super excited to talk to them about how how Shri is using AI, but absolutely love their tool. Um, and then probably the third tool I'll shout out that I have to confess that I wasn't a huge fan of, but they've made huge steps and progress is Google Gemini and how they're incorporating that into the workspace, um, the power that it can provide in tools like a Notebook LLM and other tools that they offer is pretty impactful. And there's so many use cases there in how to use it. But again, on a day to day basis, I'm using Gemini within Gmail to help pull information pretty quickly, to help with at least setting a scope for a draft of an email, thinking about ways in which it can help me work faster. And then as a sales leader, using all these tools, but primarily GPT and Gemini around sales research, sales communication, sales feedback as a coach, has been absolutely powerful. So those are the tools that I'd say have like made it into my day to day. Last shout out I'll give, and we'll have somebody from this company come and join us in the upcoming episodes as well as Zapier. I'm a huge Zap fan, and how Zap can connect and Zap within Zap, the AI capabilities are quite powerful as well. What about you?
Oh man, that's a fantastic list. Yeah, so I'll give 3 to 5 as well. So a bit of context about what my work looks like because that helps explain these tools. Uh, my work now is so different from being in the corporate space, general counsel of a company. My work is narrower and a lot deeper now, and so the kinds of tools that I need also end up being a fair bit different. As a part of my work, I end up I get to write a whole lot. And by write, I often mean 20 to 30,000 word articles with between 200 and 400 citations and footnotes. That's sort of the way writing in the legal academia field works. So as you can imagine, managing 2 to 3 to 400 different sources, keeping them together, actually reading them, etc. That alone is a monumental task. So, Anthony, you mentioned Notebook LM, unbelievably powerful tool where you have large numbers of documents that you need to find some way to effectively manage and mine for information. So my workflow for writing an article is now completely different. My starting point is very similar. I still go through the um, article and other writings gathering process. For that, I use a combination of my own, manual processes and a lot of ChatGPT and Gemini to also help ensure that I've really found all of the very best thinkers in whatever spaces that I'm looking at. And if there's a particular idea that I don't know whether someone's written about, I'll go to those tools and say, "Hey, has anybody written on this topic? If so, I need links, I need names, etc." And that's a great starting point. But then I'll bring those into Notebook LM after reading through them, and instead of what I used to do, which is basically make a gigantic Word document where I copy and paste all my favorite quotes and say, "Oh, it's from this article. I might want to use that later. And this one's over here." If I know the good quotes are in there, I don't write it down anymore. I might make a note about, hey, good stuff here, but I'll just get it all in a Notebook LM. And then I can just query Notebook LM and say, hey, uh, what what do my sources have to say about this? And if I prompt effectively, then what I end up getting, I mean, I can do something like write a paragraph that I know is supported by various things in the article. And if I prompt it effectively, like, here's a paragraph I just wrote, I suspect my sources support it. Please provide properly formatted citations and quotes that support each of these sentences. It will both extract those, and Notebook LM solves the hallucination problem by giving you a direct link and highlight to the place in the article that says the thing. So, from an academic perspective, hugely powerful. So, it's just awesome. So, pivoting to a few other tools, um, I am a much faster listener than I am reader. Turns out I'm actually a slow reader, bad quality for an academic to have. But I listen on 2.5, 3.5, 4x speed. So there are a couple tools out there that can take a law review article and turn it into really good speech. Before AI, not possible because remember those footnotes I mentioned, right? So what you would end up having if you put it into other text to speech is it would just read top bottom of the page, right? It would read and then suddenly it's reading a bunch of footnotes and it's disjointed and you can't understand it. It's nonsense. But there are great tools out there, including one that a friend of mine is in the process of building sort of with my input that I use every day. It extracts just the non footnote materials formats it really well, and then reads it in a beautiful, very articulate voice. And so I digest basically all of my written materials that way, twice as fast as I can read it. And that app is called Canto, and it's not even released yet, but it's already kind of kicking butt. Um, Similarly, I, Anthony mentioned where he and I first met, right? At these, large groups of other kind of legal executives. The suite sometimes puts on these major conferences, and I kept running into this problem where I would meet so many fascinating people, and I would want to meet to keep up with them, and I couldn't. I couldn't remember everybody, and so I tried to carry around a little notebook and write people's information down, and that was awkward and didn't work. So thanks to one of my favorite AI based apps, Cursor, which is a tool that enables you to code extremely effectively with the assistance of AI. I built a small app that solves this problem. So now when I go to a conference, I meet someone, I press a button, I just talk about everything that I remember from that conversation, and then put the phone back in my pocket, and it extracts all the information I have about that person, their name, where they work, what they do, what was interesting about the conversation, and I can build a dossier of the people that I met, um, just by making a 10-second recording after meeting them, and I don't have to sit there and try to write everything
That's
down with my
awesome, man.
sloppy handwriting. So little tools like this, it's really powerful stuff, and a lot of these use cases are surprising, but it is sort of the exercise of if you encounter a real world problem, you might ask, is there a way that AI could fix this? Because sometimes the answer is just yes.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's a handful of what I use nowadays.
That's incredible, Zach. And I know we didn't talk about vibe coding earlier, but like I love that you provided an example of how you vibe coded a solution to a problem
For
you were
sure.
experiencing, and frankly, many others experience. And even in the past week, like a company like Replit just came out with a way in which you can build apps and quickly post it in the App Store. I mean,
Right.
the ability for us to solve the problems we're facing is without frankly even needing to know how to code
Yeah.
is just quite incredible. So yeah, really, really awesome to hear about how we're using it in our day to day. Loved it. Love that you talked about how Notebook LLM doesn't hallucinate either, right? Like the power in that tool. I sort of feel like it's sitting in the Google suite as this underutilized, underrated, incredibly powerful tool. That again, if you use it in the right ways, can make a huge, huge impact. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah, and I should say not completely hallucination proof,
yeah,
but we mentioned earlier about you have that tension between creativity on the one hand and not hallucinating on the other. And one of the big trades that Notebook LM makes is it's not very creative.
yeah,
It's not as enjoyable to have like
yeah,
a lengthy conversation with. But for that reduced creativity, you get quite a bit more reliability. And so for some purposes, it's super powerful and effective. And it goes to show that like even the tools themselves can be calibrated to not just meet different needs, but to kind of anticipate different degrees of a lawyer's favorite subject, which is risk, right? Sometimes your risk appetite is very low. So you don't want creativity. You want a really reliable tool. Sometimes you want to have a really fun conversation or you want it to help you with something very creative, in which case, forget risk. Let's go broad and be as creative as possible. And this technology can do all of that, everything in between.
it's amazing. It's amazing. Well, Zach, I'm really looking forward to what's coming up next. We've got some
Yeah, likewise.
amazing guests scheduled. We're going to have great conversations, and hopefully, we can deep dive into the impact that AI is having on one's day to day and in their profession and career. So, Zach, I always like to end things here by maybe sharing one takeaway, right? We've talked a lot about the basics today, definitions, tools. We talked about how you and I are using AI. If folks were to try one thing this week with AI, what would you encourage them to do?
Yeah, you mentioned some of the ways that we can use large language models kind of in substitution for Google. Sometimes you want to use Google because again, you want that very precise thing. You're searching for something in particular. But if you're facing one of those tasks that feels like it's going to be time consuming, like for instance, suppose that you really need to sell your car and you want to think about selling it to a dealership. That kind of process could be a real pain in the butt. Tell tell ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude what you want to do and ask it for some help. That's one of those use cases where it's very likely to save you a whole lot of time. It'll probably pull together 7 or 8 links in your area that do exactly the kind of thing that you want. Anthony, you also mentioned earlier, prompting matters a lot. So don't just say, like you might to a search engine, sell used car San Francisco. Say, like you would to a person, uh, I want to sell my car in San Francisco, but I hate this process. It's daunting. It takes me a really long time just to find all the sources. So I want you to help make this easy for me. I want 4 or 5 options of companies that have a good track record of buying used cars and that have good reviews. I don't want to get screwed. Say something like that in your own language. And it's incredible what kind of useful responses you can get.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. So encourage all of you to please try that, be it selling a car or any other challenge that you would have taken 30, 45 minutes on Google to figure out. Uh, Try it out, test it, and see what output it provides. Would love to hear from you all on that. Anyway, Zac, thank you. Really enjoyed getting to chat with you on this. Super excited about our upcoming episodes. To all our listeners, this has been the A to Z on AI, and we'll see you next week.
See you next time.